thank you for allowing me to talk about it, my personal story and challenges I've overcome only because of faith and only because God allows me. And about the time I start getting a little too big for my britches, you know, because I get to go to a lot of neat things, and I get to meet a lot of what you might think is important people. But there's a verse in Corinthians, and it says, I am what I am by God's grace. It's not me, but God's grace that works through me. It's not me, it's God's grace. And that's what I use to remind myself of where I should be. I should be grounded. I should remember where I came from, and I'm proud of those very humble roots. You know, I'm a very introspective person. I'm not shy, but I tend to be very introspective. And so I am constantly, not just as I start my day, I mean, all night long, I think my mind is going about what I have to face. And my conversations with God don't just start in the morning, it's all the time. And I think this fits into the prayer that Naomi talked about, how I'm always planning, always doing, but one of the last things I remember to do sometimes is turn it over. Turn it over to God. Because about the time I get so wrapped up in what else can I do, I have to stop and realize, okay, I've done everything I know how to do, Lord. I've done everything I know how to do. Now it's up to you. There's no such thing. Let me let you off the hook right now if you're trying to do that. There is no such thing. Something is always going to suffer just because of something else. And my family knows that. They give me permission to do what I do. In fact, the pressure's on my husband. I said, when you say you've had enough, I'll say, okay, I love you more than my job. But it really is, there's no such thing. Something is always going to suffer at the expense of the other thing. I think what's important is to realize that when you do have that time with your family, you make the most of it and you cherish it for all it's worth. Especially when it comes to it being an elected official. It's not like I'm appointed or I'm hired, where I have days off and a certain schedule. I have a responsibility to people who put a mark by my name. And they have expectations to be accessible, to be able to pick up the phone and call me, to be able to get some of my time. And if there's anything that I didn't plan for, was how many people wanted just a little bit of my time. But being an elected is very different than any kind of other job when you have a public responsibility. You train the deputies in real life situations. We will take an incident like Minkler, for instance, where we lost a deputy sheriff, and use that as a training exercise. Unfortunately, this is a different world that we live in. We have learned just vehicle stops. We lost Deputy Dennis Phelps at a vehicle stop, traffic violation, and the guy came out of the car with a rifle and shot him. Deputy Tellin, we lost him doing a suspicious person check. I mean, what some people might say routine calls, suspicious person at this house in Dunlap, and he ended up getting shot with a shotgun. We just need to prepare knowing that it could happen at any time in any incident and still have the mindset of servant leadership, as was mentioned, servant leadership and servant purpose in what they do. And that's a difficult person to find. When you get hired for a law enforcement job, you go through a medical, a psychological, a polygraph, a background to try and find just the person that can find the balance in that. And it's really a fine line because of the person that we want that is assertive can cross that line to overly aggressive very easily. And this job can make you dark. I don't know if any of you have had law enforcement in your family that this has happened to, but it can really make you dark. And there are people like that when they retire, they're bitter and they're angry and they just go. My favorite people who have retired are those that said, look, I moved around, I did a lot of different jobs, I didn't get stuck in one place where you get dark because you can. But it can make you that way, and it really is a personal responsibility to keep positive after years and years and years of seeing some awful, awful things. The most difficult decision I've had to make is who to lay off. I mean, who do I lay off when I know that it's budgeting is math. You have this much money, you have this many people, this is what it costs you, it's math. But what we can't forget is when you have to tell somebody they're laid off, they have families, they have a mortgage, they have car payments. So it becomes more of a matter of math than these are real people. So making that decision about how I went about that was very difficult. And I lost sleep knowing that families didn't have an income because of a decision I had to make. The most difficult task is having to go and meet with the wife of a deputy who had been shot and was not coming home that night. I always thought if this happened to me, it would be in the middle of the night where I'd be knocking on the door. Not at 10:30 in the morning would I have to go to her place of business and break the news to her there. That was the most difficult thing I've ever had to do. I devastated her world that morning. I don't think God expects us to only set aside a certain length of part of the day for Him. I think He wants us to have our whole day with Him. And so that's where I think it's important. I don't care if it's sitting at my desk looking at email. I have a Bible that's got all kinds of little sticky notes in it right by my computer. And so even if it's 2 minutes, I'll pick it up and I'll say, what does God have to, in fact, just yesterday, what does God have to say about justice? And I looked it up. And in fact, the verse I found was in Micah. And it said, do justly and show mercy. And I thought, that's a good law enforcement message, to do justly, hold people accountable, and show mercy.